Hello, welcome to my Altered TCG set review for the Lyra spells and permanents. First up here we have the Hooked spell. Target character switches expeditions. In the Axiom video, I mentioned I thought this can be a good way to stay ahead and ensure 1/1s and is really poor at... it's a lot poorer at getting 2-0s. And that's going to make the rare point feel like it's costing a lot if it's limited in the applications in that way. I don't see even Nevenka having so many advantages that she can just like round everything up by finishing someone off with this. So I'm going to give this a D. Acapella training. Target character gains fleeting. This is a very cheap way to gain one of the abilities mentioned on Lyra Festival. However, sometimes you already have that ability just from the rules of the game. It's also a really powerful preemptive sabotage, and it maintains card parity when you use it to sabotage. You spend 2 halves and you get rid of 2 halves. I'm going to give this a B. I think if you know what you're doing, including this in your deck, there's going to be a few uses for it. It may end up that anything that you want to point this at, you want to point Paint Prison or a Cloth Cocoon at. But things that didn't have any of the abilities for Cloth Cocoon, possibly you want to prevent the second play using an acapella training. The rare one costs more and then replaces the additional use with a card. So you're getting actually 3 card uses out of 1 card. So it's like a half, it's like a semi-draw. But you're having to spend 2 mana to give something fleeting and spend a rare point. I think if the Lyra Cloth Dancer and the support abilities on uniques for Lyra Cloth Dancer weren't both available, and if the common version wasn't available, I'd be interested in doing this. But I think you probably should gravitate towards one of those other options. Find a way to balance out when you're drawing cards, and just like use the common acapella training and catch up somewhere else in your deck building is probably going to be better. Especially because the nature of giving something fleeting means that the later in the round that you could play it, the more you get to pick which targets to hit with it. So I'll give this one a C. I wouldn't be shocked if drawing this whole card just makes this the better one. And definitely if you have like a comprehensive marathon strategy where you're hoping your opponent completely runs out of cards and that you do not, this is likely to be the one that you use for that kind of strategy, because it draws you into some actual cards to actually win the game with after you've done the sabotage part. Twinkle Twinkle. Target character gains a sleep, and then it has the next card you play ability. It's really hard to resupply this with Fen and feel like, oh no, I really wish I didn't resupply a Twinkle Twinkle, because Fen has so many extra cards that she can use the 1 extra mana ability pretty flexibly. Even if it's not the best thing, it's pretty flexible. And then the top part is good on the last turn of the game. It can be good before the last turn of the game on your own characters that are doomed not to win. And then it can be good on a character if you're willing to chain sleep. If you're willing to sleep at this phase, and then when it's a problem that it's woken up again, sleep it again. Hopefully that's an especially large character. all of that together makes this an A for Fen, maybe shared with the ranking of the rare. Navenka's probably also going to want this. For Navenka, it feels a lot more like a weaker beauty sleep, and a weaker beauty sleep is just still good enough. It feels like you'd expect this to be a rare almost, with the flexibility, the supportability, supporting a spell effect that feels good enough. Wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being fewer than 3 copies in deck builds because of the redundant copies of it kind of creating the same timing issues. All characters in target expedition gain a sleep. I think it's tricky to time this. You're kind of relying on your opponent having an expensive turn because your turn is a 4, and you're expecting your opponent to have committed everything, because if you sleep everything in one expedition and then you run out of mana and your opponent plays even something tiny there, then you feel terrible. Even if it's the last turn in the game and those characters never wake up, you still feel terrible in a certain way. And this also has fleeting, and overall that's going to be a D. This one's also way less good for the Lyra Festival applications. The previous card is like really important for Lyra Festival if you're doing a Lyra Festival deck. Because besides this one, you only have 3 copies of Sandman. So you might want to look at a 4th copy or 5th copy of this sleep effect specifically. Cloth Cocoon. Discard target fleeting, anchored, or asleep character, or discard target permanent. The rare makes it cheaper. I'll give both the common and rare the same grade. I'm not sure you'll have enough rare points for the rare, and I think you're probably more likely to play the common, because I think when you've identified that it's a good time to play Cloth Cocoon, that you'll have the mana to spare because you're hitting something big enough that you're excited about sabotaging it too. Well, unless it was fleeting. Anyway, these are both an A. One thing that pushes it to an A is that Robin Hood is always an asleep character unless Mario is playing around the Cloth Cocoon, and the Robin Hood gets completely discarded. So it is possibly the only card in the game that trades 1-for-1 with a Robin Hood, where the mana exchange is equal and the card exchange is equal. You just are done with the whole Robin Hood thing. A lot of other characters that completely discard Robin Hood cost as much as Robin Hood and then cost more after the tax, or they have a special extra cost, and Cloth Cocoon can just do it. Robin Hood is still like better positioned because if you spend down below the cost of Cloth Cocoon and then Robin Hood comes out, you can be unable to play your Cloth Cocoon right away. So I wouldn't mulligan away Robin Hood against Lyra or anything. But that interaction is really, really important. And even if it didn't exist, you would have the anchored blowouts. You could just remove anything with fleeting that's sufficiently large, and that makes it the same as Keylon Burst, since that only sends reserve anyway on the specific characters. That's all before you combo it with Acapella Training to target things you weren't able to target before. I think you might not need to combo it a lot of the time. Well, I'll find out whether the rare is more popular. The good thing about the rare is that even though you're only using this mana cost reduction one time, double mana cost reductions are pretty rare on cards anyway, and you have really good consistency of not mana zoning this. Probably, maybe occasionally you have to mana zone this, but it's one of your best cards. Definitely, if you don't know what's going on, you are probably keeping this a lot, but if you have an idea of what's going on, it is a situational card. All in. Roll a die. Target character gets X boosts, where X is the result. This is a really volatile spell. We can look at the rear next. You can discard a card to get 2 boosts. This is a pretty volatile spell where you don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be. And I think this kind of random improvement would be, it'd be worthwhile if this just made a token that had this many boosts. But I feel like the restriction on being able to gamble only in places where a character has only been committed makes this whole package not worth it. It's a 3 mana spell, and it doesn't have fleeting, but when a spell that is difficult to find a situation for doesn't have fleeting, it kind of gets a pseudo fleeting that you're probably going to discard it from reserve because you just can't find that very specific situation. But the very specific situation for all in is that you need to be unable to use 3 mana to flip either of the lanes in a normal way. And then it needs to be possible for you to flip that lane if the 3 mana hits like a 4, 5, or 6. And it's hard to be losing a lane that badly. It's not hard to improve the dice roll with Martingale or something. It's hard to be losing a lane that badly. And all of those other cards that you would use to flip lanes that you're only losing by 2 or 3, those cards are way better at the start of the game. They're way more flexible, all sorts of things. So D for all in, and another D for this all in. This is the all in that the rare one maybe you would use for some kind of cheese where you're trying to anchor the thing that you're throwing all in on. But there's not a lot of anchored in the faction. And it's a high-risk strategy where Fen and Nevenka both have advancement-based strategies and Lyra Festival-based strategies that aren't really based on anchoring a vulnerable character. So Paint Prison. You may discard a card from your reserve to reduce my cost by 2. Return target character or permanent to the top of its owner's deck. And this one, oh yeah, this is one of the worst rarifications in the game, because you get a discount if you don't discard from the reserve, and otherwise you don't get a discount. I think Nevenka doesn't want this at all, and Fen does. Which is kind of funny because the art seems to portray a drawing that Nevenka drew doing something cool. But I think the rate on this spell is like slightly less than what you expect out of a card. You kind of want to spend 3 to top deck an enemy thing that is upsetting you. Because you would normally spend 4 to completely get rid of it with Banishing Gate, but knowing that they will always draw it immediately is a meaningful downside that's like enough that you would want a 1 mana discount. But it is kind of exciting to do it for actually 3, so Fen is the one who is going to be doing this for 3 pretty reliably. You might not want to play the full 3 of these to make sure you have enough food in the reserve to use on this, but I think the way Fen can find trash cards in reserve and just use this for 3 makes it an A for her, and I'd play it pretty specifically in her. One thing to remember about all of these removal spells is not to play them in a rock unless you absolutely love them, and this wouldn't be one of those, because you have to resolve effects at noon with a rock if you hit them off your gamble ability. and you'd really prefer to get 0 mana effects instead of adding it to your hand, which she does let you do as a backup. Mind Apotheosis. So this is the card that is supposed to be the Iraq hit. Reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. Choose up to 2 and put them into your expeditions. They gain fleeting, discard the others. I think it's cost 8. Yeah, you can make it cost 8. I think none of the heroes should be doing this. The turn that Nevenka would want to play this to close out a game is the same turn that I would be focused on a small step strategy. So those are in some tension. And as for a rock and the appeal of playing this for free, I think this encourages you to put the kind of characters in your deck that you don't really want to play as a rock, because you want to play these 0 characters that have certain specializations, and then that makes you want to play other 0 characters that have their own specializations, or play small rounded characters that plug the rounded character hole as minimally as possible while still letting you play more 0 cards. So the kinds of characters you have to add to your deck to support this are kind of a burden. If you really want to high roll the Iraq, I think it would be better to just play 1 or 2 huge characters like Kybera instead of playing this and the Kybera. That's more deck slots that aren't functional early in the game. So I'm going to give this, the A was still on screen. I'm going to give this a D. I'm going to give this Mind Apotheosis also a D. This will probably be the most avidly tested by people with some wild uniques that cost like 8 that they want to see more. We'll see how it pans out. Ride the Bifrost. All characters you control switch expeditions. So I mixed this up with Hooked a little bit. This is the one that can't triage biome specializations. Hooked can move things to the wrong biome, because this one only does your own expeditions. I was a little unfairly negative on Hooked, but I still think the grade is the same. I'm going to give this a D. Nevenka runs into a somewhat similar issue where the turn to play this, where you have enough mana to play this, because you need a bunch of creatures in play for this to make sense. The time you have the mana to play this might also be the turn where you are trying to use the small step ahead spell to finish the game. If it fits anywhere, it would be to play this the turn right before you do that as Nevenka, but when most of your cards are characters and then you want to add a few removals to remove very specific threats, there's just not enough room in a deck for a highly specific effect like this oftentimes. So I think it won't often make it in there. This one can arbitrage expeditions en masse. It can move a bunch of your opponent's things into the wrong expedition. But if you're up against Ortis, there's not going to be any specialized characters at all if they don't like Frog Prince. And throughout the core set, there can just possibly not be enough specialized characters to get your mileage out of this. This is a D. Lyra Festival. I just noticed the rare one does not draw a card. So the common one draws a card. The rare one will give one of your characters fleeting, anchored, or asleep. And both of them will win you the game at dusk if you control a fleeting, anchored, and asleep character. I think each of the advantages provided by Lyra Festival is compelling. In Muna, I would be strongly skewed towards the common version, but it's a closer call in Lyra because Lyra does struggle to get the anchored ability on a lot of cards. and not as much to his sleeve ability, but Lyra might struggle to find enough characters with Anchored. Nevenka can roll a 6 if you are bent on using Lyra Festival and her instead of Fen. The advantage of drawing a card is that you can just play this as an early play and see a new card from your deck when you do that, and challenge your opponent on showing you that they have the removal for it right away. And if they do play the removal on it right away, you can just play another one. Or you can just like start winning lanes the turn that they do that because they've spent some mana. And then if you played this on a turn you were going to have trouble using 4 mana to win lanes anyway, it's kind of like moving the ball around in a beneficial way. And you end up a card if they have to spend a spell and you lost this but you draw a replacement card. One thing I like about the approach of using the common is if you have to collect more of these characters that have more abilities, it also means that you're passing turn more to try to pull that off. So it might mean that your opponent doesn't have priority to play removals. I will give both of these an A. I think we'll probably see the rare version be more successful. But I kind of want to play the common version and prove that it doesn't work and then play the rare version if I have to. I guess that's the way I think about it. Because having a bailout option can lead to a more consistent deck. Bailout option being draw a card. Ouroboros, Lyra Bastion. If you roll 1 or more dice, roll that many dice plus 1 and ignore the roll of your choice. The rare version costs 3. So the ways to roll dice are All In, Asmodeus, Ouroboros Trickster, probably one card I'm forgetting, and Nevenka. If you look at Ouroboros Trickster, she can get +1/+1. If you look at Asmodeus, you get a pretty reasonable amount of benefit here, but I'm not sure you want to run Asmodeus. I gave him a mixed review. And similar case for All In, where, well, in that case, All In really likes this, but it's unclear that we actually want to use that specific card. And anytime you're unsure whether you want to include the card in your deck, you also kind of amplify that with an uncertainty that you will be keeping it instead of mana zoning it. For instance, if you draw this alongside Asmodeus in your opening hand, it might be the case that either Asmodeus or Ouroboros needs to go into mana because those are not early game plays. Or they're not early game board development. They might, the Bastion might be an early game punting a turn play. I think when you consider that Anchor and +1/+1 are both good outcomes on Nevenka, you can look at the number of rolls you will have in a game and find that this is kind of a more random card because it only has a small chance of actually doing anything. To actually do anything each time you use Nevenka, you're trying to roll a 6, or not a 6, a 1. You need to roll a 1 for this to really do something every time you use Nevenka. And if you play this on turn 3 and there's only going to be 7 turns of play, that's 7 dice throws to try to make this do something. And you know for sure that you lost 1 or 2 expeditions. So that's 7 throws to try to win the expedition back that you threw, and then win another expedition. So if there's 6 faces on a die, and you're trying to get a 1 so you can fix it, because this doesn't do anything if the first die you rolled is the one you're happy with. If you're throwing it 7 times, a 6-face die, you're probably not going to get to fix 2 throws. You can if the very first one and the very last one are in like a super non-random ordering of it. But on average, out of a few throws, you probably won't get to fix 2 of them. And given that that's the case, I think that is not, it's not even good when you know you have it turn 1 with that kind of analysis. But when you consider that you can spend a rare point on this, put it into your deck, shuffle up, and then this can be the thing you draw when you hit 7 mana, it's a really, really bad card. I think both of these are one of the worst cards in the game. I'm giving both of them a D. I think Nevenka is an excellent character who does not need this, and you can just actually believe in the dice and be successful that way. And if you play an Ouroboros Trickster and you get a 2 and you don't like your 2, play another Ouroboros Trickster. Play the Ouroboros Trickster you put in your deck instead of this, and it gets to participate in a completely different expedition if you want to. It gets to be way better at multiple phases of the game. The total number of stats you have afterwards is higher. I'm just much more excited about it in several ways. You can architect situations where that kind of comparison doesn't continue to hold true. But if you take the long look at most situations, I think it does not come out in this card's favor most of the time. Magical Training. Draw a card. This effect is really good in Aphanis, where you get a +1/+1, and it's probably interesting if it doesn't cost a rare point, but I think it's going to be worse in like Esmeralda and other ways of accruing additional cards that don't require as much rare points or get more impressive when you put a rare point into them. So this is again a D. I guess I should make a note here that it is a tool you could use for a big Lyra festival turn where you're trying to run your opponent out of their priorities so that you can start deploying characters and permanents that can't be removed because your opponent's tagged out of the round. And it's pretty good for that in the sense that it draws you an additional card, which might be the card you need to actually do the combo, or it might be just that this is more flexible than other 1 costs because you could play it earlier if you needed to. But I think it's still probably not good enough for that even. Off you go. Send a reserve target character with hand cost 3 or less. This is a really powerful effect. This is not exciting synergy for Fen, unfortunately, because it costs 4 the second time. Fen wishes this was a 2/2 fleeting, actually. This is pretty good in the aggressive Nevenka strategy of trying to win lanes early because you have a boost as your hero character ability. And as you can remove 3 cost characters that are kind of larger than what you could do on a 2 cost character if you played that. I'll give this a B. It might actually be that there's enough rare points lying around that this is just a staple and it's just 3 in every deck. But the concern with getting value out of the back half is a bit of a concern. Fen doesn't really need to use the back half because she just has a lot of extra cards. But Fen's upset that she's resupplying this instead of resupplying cool stuff. Nevenka could run out of cards if she played this. That would be something I might worry about for her. But the base power level is really strong, and it might depend a lot on how much these types of spells influence the way people build. If they put all their eggs in one basket for you to blow up. Spycraft, sabotage, then resupply. I think this is... What was the common versus rare version in Izmir? I don't remember for sure. But this is 2 halves of a card in exchange for 1 half of a card. And Fen is really good at making that happen that way. But Fen is going to flood her own reserve with this. I think Navenka could like this, though. The Tanuki was a little bit awkward. And I'm not sure Lyra Cloth Dancer is always going to be better than this. So I'm going to give this like a C. I think Navenka could be in a spot where she wants to remove specific characters that she can't beat and not have to deal with them later. And she could also use the extra card. She could construct a deck that runs out of cards by using lots of small characters. So I think it could fit for her. Small step, giant leap. This is a little bit wonky, and it's a little hard to be sure about how easy it will be to keep this in your hand until the turn when it's most powerful. Because this is mainly powerful when you use it to win the game. So you have to hold it until both players have advanced 6 times, and then you play it for your 7th advancement. And it doesn't matter what else has happened that turn. Fen can resupply this and use it for free, but she has to hold space in her reserve the entire time it's there, whereas the characters who are holding it in their hand have infinite hand size. And then Fen, if she had this in her reserve, also is giving the opponent the knowledge and flexibility to sabotage the small step if the small step is threatening, or just not sabotage the small step if they're confident they can stay ahead on expeditions and make it not threatening that way. So it's a good bit less valuable for Fen in those ways, and I really see Fen leaning into the Lyra Festival when she's adding weird cards to the deck. Cards that support it, or just cards that win expeditions instead of this. But in Navenka, I think this is really good to end the game when the scaling on your boost counter that you have on your ability is not cutting it as much anymore. Or when your opponent is starting to synergize their cards together, like token, boost, and Ordis, and Lyra is kind of not having as many of those cool things at the higher mana values, then hopefully you've advanced 6 times by that point, and Navenka can finish the game with this. So I'm going to give it an A on that expectation. You could also play this in Arak. I think Arak might be a little bit less interested because maybe she's imagining she's getting a 2-0 around about when this would happen. But if she gets the 2-0 the turn before this happens, or the turn after, or the rhythm of when the ability pops doesn't match this, there's like no reason she can't play it as much as the others. It's you can still get your applause counters even if you cut a 0 cost or 2 for this. And of course, if you play it for free, then it's a solid free play. Aether Shard. Aether Shard is a D. It is hard to have 5 fewer cards than you needed to win a game of Altered. It's possible to have 2 fewer cards than you needed to win a game of Altered, and then all those cards that get you extra cards that cost way less than this are what you should go for. Category, Izmir Bastion. The next spell you play this turn is free. You really want to be playing Celebration Day with this instead of playing Small Step, because Celebration Day extends the amount of time you have to do wild stuff. The spell deck for Lyra is just not there in the base set. This is a D for sure. All your removals are worse than Ysmir too. It's just not doing anything. And that's back to Hooked. Is there a second page? There's a second. I think it automatically takes me to the second page, right? That's everything. So that's my review of the Lyra spells and permanents. I'm going to do one more video about the factions relative to each other, because I realized that when ranking the heroes and ranking them against the other choices within the faction, I never really ranked the heroes against heroes from other factions. And I felt like that wasn't really fair, because you could make an idiosyncratic choice to play a hero even if you thought another one was stronger. And you can also make an idiosyncratic choice to play a faction even if you think another faction is stronger. But the idea of this card review is to make some comparisons, telling you a guess at what trade-offs are happening when you do that. And so I'd like to have at least a general rating of the heroes against each other, even across factions. So I'll do a faction ranking video. So I hope you tune in for that. But this is the end of this series. Well, this is, I consider that one part of the series, but this has now covered every single card from the 500 plus card base set, which is a really large base set. And if you manage to watch all of these videos, I don't think there is more than 10 such people who did that, and congratulations.